This is Clue. It was originally called Murder when it was invented by Anthony Pratt in 1943. Pratt eventually sold production rights to Waddingtons, who marketed the game in 1949 as Cluedo in the UK, and Parker Brothers, who sold the game as Clue in the US. Of course, Clue has become so popular over the years that it spawned some really interesting collector's edition spin-offs, as well as video games and a hit 1985 movie. Today I have a special treat. I've got this Winning Moves 1949 replica edition, as well as a modern Hasbro edition and a special edition that I found particularly neat. Let's get these out on the table and have a look at how these editions of Clue stack up. All right, this is awesome. Well, let's take a closer look, shall we? I've always wanted to do that. So today we've got the 2024 Winning Moves Throwback Edition featuring the original cast from the 1949 Clue, as well as the original map with original rules. We've got this 2017 Golden Girls edition from Hasbro, and this 2023 Hasbro edition, which is the most current core edition available. So let's have a look at all three of these editions of Clue, see what differences there are between the original 1949's rules and the 2023 edition's rules, as well as how they spiced up this Golden Girls Collector's Edition. Why don't we get started with the game boxes? This 2024 Winning Moves Throwback Edition to the 1949 Clue has some pretty eye-catching art, albeit it's obviously not the same art that would have been featured on the 1949 release. However, it does highlight that you have the original cast of characters as well as the original map of rooms from the 1949 edition. It's a lift-off top box, and when we flip it over, it has standard fare for a board game. That is to say, a close-up photograph of the board game as well as its components and a brief description of what the gameplay is like. When we open it up, we have a small cardboard organizer that is enough to keep the weight distributed in the center of the box and keeps all the components stored nicely. When we jump over to this 2017 edition, this Golden Girls Collector's Edition of Clue from Hasbro, this is some really great cover art. I love that the whole cast of characters is displayed very prominently with this teal and pink motif here that screams mid-80s. When we flip it over, we have some standard fare for board games. Again, close-up photographs of the game board and the game's components, as well as a very melodramatic description of what this particular game's story is all about. When we open up this lift-off top box, we do have a very sturdy, though very confusing plastic organizer. Now, this organizer first led me to believe that perhaps the gameplay in this edition was quite complex by comparison to other versions of Clue, but that's not the case. It seems like this was a plastic organizer left over from some other game, used basically to fill the empty space within this box, because it does a good job of keeping all of the components stowed safely, but it was clearly not purpose-built for this game, which kind of made me laugh when I actually figured that out. So, great organizer, but very confusing. Moving on to the 2023 Hasbro edition of Clue, we have some very striking cover art, this time a lot darker and richer colors with the bold Clue titling in white. There's no mistaking what this game is, and I actually really like this modern cover art featuring the refreshed characters. When we flip it over, we see, again, standard fare for board games. Close-up photos of the game components and game board, as well as a description of what the gameplay is like. Is that common on game boxes? Absolutely. Let's not say that it's not boring, but how else are you going to tell people what the contents of the game are like? So, sorry to be repetitive, but the back of game boxes is repetitive. Now, when we open it up, we see no such frivolous wasted plastic like we do in the 2017 edition. In fact, we see a richly printed set of inserts and organizers that fill in a little additional backstory about the characters and the goings-on surrounding this mystery, as well as enough space fill to keep all of the pieces of the game stowed neatly without bouncing all over the box. Now, I did notice that it was easier to keep the evidence pad underneath the big insert that has the newspaper clipping for Mr. Body, because it didn't fit along with the cards and the component box in the little organizer space to the side of the box. And I'll take this opportunity to point out that I'm very impressed by how many player sheets that Hasbro provided. Thank you. We'll get to that more in depth a little bit later. So, all three excellent boxes that do a great job of storing their respective games, even if they do so in a confusing way. So let's get these off of the table so we can focus more on the game boards. All right, now that we've got the boxes out of the way, we can take a closer look at the games and components themselves. Let's start with the 2024 Winning Moves Throwback Edition to the 1949 edition. Right away, the game board art is very bright and vibrantly colored. I will say none of the art says to me at all that this is reminiscent of how it looked in 1949. That's not to say that it's ugly. That's to say that the modern printing techniques definitely show. Even things like drop shadow and dimension that are shown around the text, the type of fonts in general. At the time that this would have been produced in 1949, most likely that board would have been a lithographic print, so it would have had a significantly different art quality. That being said, it is the original map, original roster of rooms, and original roster of characters. So if we're focusing on the fact that the gameplay is supposed to be the core mechanics of the 1949, I'm not going to knock this for having ugly art. I actually think that it's a very attractive iteration of Clue. I just don't want to misrepresent it as a one-to-one recreation of a 1949 edition from Parker Brothers, because I don't think that that's at all the case. Now, that being said, we can get into the classic shape of the pawns. I thought they were very nice. They look like pieces of lathed wood, like older pawns might have been at the time. However, these are definitely plastic. The weapons, now here's an interesting little factoid here. The original weapons, a lot of people will fondly remember the gun as being a revolver. However, in the original 1949 edition, both in the UK and the US, they were automatic pistols, and they were even different based on localization. In the US, it was a Browning 1911. However, in the UK, shame on me, I can't recall off the top of my head what the model was, but it was a separate, more locally popular automatic pistol. So they were actually based on real automatic pistols, or semi-automatic pistols, which I thought was fascinating. Otherwise, we have the candlestick, the rope, the wrench, the lead pipe, and the knife. Interestingly, the original has a single die, which I notice on these other ones there are two dice. So we have all the original characters, we have the original weapons, we have a single die. We do have these little scorecards here for keeping track of your clues, and I gotta say, boo, boo. The quality on these is very lackluster. They're very thin, and you get all too few of them. It is nice that they included a QR code so you can print extra score sheets. So I will give bonus points to Winning Moves, but I am going to say that this was kind of a chintzy amount. I wouldn't have had complaints if I had at least double the amount. I didn't go through and count these leaves, but I'd say there's at least 5, perhaps 6. So I would have liked to have seen more of those. The case file manila envelope sleeve is quite nice. Good paper, nicely printed. This will be excellent for its function. The cards are actually quite nice. I do like the quality of print. They're thick and snappy. They have rounded corners. No complaints about the game cards whatsoever. They shuffle easily. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. So I will say, like, standouts for quality, I actually do like the print quality of the board, even if the art seems a little bit too modern for a throwback. I really admire the print quality of the cards, and they did a good job of trying to make the cards have a bit of a vintage vibe to them. The cards actually look like a modern recreation of what I can imagine the older cards would have been. So now I'm really curious to find a 49 Parker Brothers edition to see what the differences are between this recreation and an actual 49. So that would be kind of a fun project sometime. So maybe a future episode will expand on the Clue universe. The Clueniverse. Now let's move on to the one that I'm really excited for, the Golden Girls edition of Clue. Right away, I love this game board design. It's a map of the set from the show featuring all the bedrooms, the bathroom. Now they call this the lanai, the patio where they hang out, or the backyard. First time I've run across that word. If I mispronounced it wrong, just take it easy on me in the comments. Yeah, I get that from time to time. I love the player pieces being portraits of the cast, and actually there are some subtle jokes in here, like for instance Rose, who's played by Betty White, is Mrs. White, and I also like that Blanche here is Miss Scarlet, which I think is a nod to her for being from the South, so I thought that was pretty funny as well. The clues are things like lipstick and a bathrobe and a slipper and a purse, and that's because this is not a murder mystery. No, this crime is much worse. No, we are trying to determine who ate the last slice of cheesecake. Serious business here. Now, there are some interesting game variants. This game has personality cards, so depending on who you're playing, you get one of these personality cards that allows you a special power, like once per game, you may move to any room that does not have a secret passage if you're playing as Sophia, and so on. Now, you'll also notice that there are question marks on the board, and the dice feature a question mark space. If you get a question mark space, you must draw a distraction card. Now, there can be minor distractions, such as this one, a get-rich-quick scheme, where a rumor goes unanswered. That means if somebody starts a rumor in a room to try to determine who, what, and where the person made their trespass, it can go unanswered if a player happens to have this card in their hand from drawing it from an event or distraction. Then there are major distractions, such as a dashing new man. Now, as dashing new man cards are drawn, they are set aside. When a player draws the 8th dashing new man card, that player is eliminated from the game, and that card is put back into the deck of distractions as a ticking time bomb for the next player to potentially draw, should they land on a distraction space or roll a distraction. So we have special player powers as well as unique modifiers that can either grant boons or hindrances and eliminate players, which I thought was a unique spice to the game. Of course, we also have our regular suspect and weapon and location cards here as well, with the picture of the cheesecake depicted. Very important. Thought that was great. And then we did get these customized player pads that do match the game art, and we get plenty of them, and they're printed on nice paper. However, there is no resource for downloading more. So I will say there is the little bit of drawback that you will need to photocopy your own extras should you need them. So I highly recommend, if you buy a collector's edition of Clue, get a scan of one of these early so you can make high quality copies in the future. Now, we do have a manila envelope branded again for your evidence. However, I had a good laugh because this one is gummed. Do not lick the envelope. You will only get to play the game once. I'm sure that this was just bought in a huge allotment of these manila envelopes and printed, but do not lick the gummed edge on your evidence envelope. It's the only one in this set that has that. So again, some things like the gummed edge on that envelope and the mismatched plastic organizer in the game box lead me to believe that there were certain elements of this game where costs were cut where perhaps they shouldn't have been. I also want to point out that some of the clues have a little excess metal from the casting on them. By comparison to the other editions of Clue, these were particularly sloppy. They're still chunky and well molded as far as how they were, sculpted, I should say. But as far as molding with all that excess, a little bit extra quality control would have been nice. But the overall game components are quite nice. The board art is very nice. It's got taped edges. The rule book is also nice. We'll get to the rule books here too. I actually kind of glossed over those, so we'll do them all at once here. But the Golden Girls edition of Clue, overall, I thought this was a great iteration of the classic game with some unique rules that make it a true treat. Now, let's move on to this 2023 Hasbro edition. Now, this is some striking art. Again, I see a lot of use of warm and cool colors contrasting off each other to give the mansion a very lively and detailed feel. We do have the classic room layout with secret passageways. I'm gonna say right out, big standout here, the player pieces are so nicely sculpted. I thought that was really cool. They're very highly detailed and absolutely could be painted if somebody wanted to make their set look deluxe. And speaking of deluxe, the murder weapon clues are faux gold plated. I guess, I don't know, they kind of look a little bit brassy, brassy brass gold. Very, very light, but it does give it a little bit more of a premium feel when compared to the traditional chrome or pewter that we've seen in other editions. Very nice, just very, very classy. And I want to point out that the game components came in a little cardboard storage box to keep them from bouncing around and beating each other up in the overall game box when in storage. So if one wanted to paint any of these components, you can be confident that they're not going to bounce around and chip on each other. Again, we see 2 dice, and again, we see that they're specialty dice that feature a little magnifying glass on the back. And now, in this instance, they're not referred to as distractions, but if you roll a magnifying glass, you will cause an event to happen, and events can be all kinds of random things, such as this one, poisonous plants. Plum knows a thing or two about botany and gives Black's plants a wide berth. Anybody holding the conservatory card must reveal it. Also, Mr. Body, Body is a nickname in this edition, so traditionally the victim of the murder has been referred to as Mr. Body, and in some iterations, Mr. Black, and in this, he is Mr. Body Black, according to the storyline. So we've had some changes here as well. What was it? We also have Solicitor Peacock instead of Miss Peacock, so interesting title change there. Also, yeah, Mr. Green is now Mayor Green. So, but there's a different backstory, and they wrote some lore on the box, which I thought was really neat. I always like when they add lore to this stuff, and obviously Clue deserves to evolve with the times, have characters that change and keep the story fresh, and this is a great iteration of that. We also have our traditional cards for locations, murder weapons, and players as well. We have a nice little cardboard sleeve without a flip top. This is where you put the evidence cards to solve the crime here. And like I pointed out, I love how many sheets you get with the modern Hasbro edition. This is great. I love it. This is a huge value in the game right here. No information on printing your own, but boy, it's going to take you a while to get through these because you got half a dozen games per sheet. So definitely great value there. Now, before we go too far, let's get back to the rule books I had kind of glossed over. So we're going to go back to the 2024 Winning Moves edition. This is printed out on sealed gloss paper, but it's black and white on an 11x17 quarter folded. Definitely it'll stand the test of time, but I'm not a big fan of any instructions that are folded up that have little corners like this, because eventually they'll wear out. The rules are relatively simple, but it outlines the classic Clue rules without any modifiers, events, or distractions like the dashing new man. Sorry. thought that was so funny here. No, you get very straightforward, clean, original gameplay instructions for Clue. This definitely does the job. You don't need much more than one sheet for the original Clue. The actual game is relatively simple, and actually even simpler that it only requires one die, so it's a little bit slower playing as well. When we get over to the Golden Girls edition, we have a full color, full bleed, sealed paper, nice glossy, saddle stitched instruction manual, which also has some great photos and blurbs. So the game is, the instruction manual is written like it's in character. I do like that. There are little asides and everything mid-sentence. The description on the box is the same way. The design for this game is very tongue-in-cheek. They definitely wanted to appeal to fans and make sure that they were nailing down the humor of the show, and they did. So great instruction manual there. When we hop over to the 2023 Hasbro edition, again, full color, full bleed print, sealed paper, saddle stitched booklet with great full color images of all of the gameplay components and nice thorough rules. This one will definitely stand the test of time. So I gotta say, all three of these rule books are great. The best ones are the saddle stitch, in my opinion. They tend to hold up, but sealed paper all around. So that's that glossy paper, very moisture resistant, tends to be stain resistant. So very, very nice. Will definitely stand the test of time. So now let's get to the nitty gritty here. Let's review a little bit. What do I think of all these different iterations of Clue? Well, there have been a lot of versions. In fact, I had another one that I think is like a 2015 core edition that didn't make it on the table today that also had some of the distractions or events similar to this edition. So we have seen some other alterations to the rules. Now, interestingly enough, I do enjoy the classic gameplay for simplicity's sake, and I think anybody who's new to Clue should play the original rule set without any distractions, without any type of effects or events or anything like that, which you can certainly do on all of the modern iterations without a problem. So I always recommend learning that way. So in that regard, keeping it simple and relying on a classic formula, it's a no-brainer. This 1949 Throwback Edition from Winning Moves, excellent for people who are familiar with the game that maybe don't want to add all that extra spice and maybe enjoy having it slowed down by using only one die, which I think is reasonable when you're playing with a group and when you're playing with the simplified rules. Now, that being said, the flavor that you get by adding some of these extra rule sets really does a lot to enhance my enjoyment of the game. The Golden Girls edition had different gameplay rules based on how many players that you had as well. So certain things were omitted, like you don't really need the distractions when you're playing with 2 players, whereas when you're playing with 4 to 6 players, you definitely want to have all the spice added to the game. It just changes things up and makes it a lot more fun, as well as these personality cards that have these fun little quotes on the back from the characters. Again, all of this really makes it very immersive and definitely plays up the homage to the Golden Girls show. So both as a Golden Girls game and as a Clue game, I actually really enjoyed this. Now, moving on to the modern 2023 Hasbro edition of Clue, I am so impressed by the quality. I mean, I am really impressed by the quality. The cards are a little floppier than I would like, but the print quality is there. The corners are rounded, which is something that wasn't even in the Golden Girls edition. That kind of bugged me that I had sharp corners on the cards. I like the rounded corners. It makes shuffling easier. So even though they were a little bit floppier, that's about the only quality complaint I have. I love that you get a little organizer for your game pieces. I like the quality and weight of these nice chunky die. I love the board art. The board art is a vibe. This definitely stands on its own as a core entry in the Clue series. I really like the gold brassy finish on these murder weapons here. It really adds to it. Now, again, we step back to the revolver. What's funny is I remember in the 86 edition, the revolver looked more like a pepper shaker. This looks like a Colt Army Navy revolver. So that was a little bit more Civil War era. Again, I can't stress enough how much of an enhancement it is to have these nice sculpted character pieces moving around in the mansion. It's great. And the rule set with the events, and as well as they also have an alternate rule set for playing with 2 players. That's really cool, where you put evidence cards. So you can play, when you're playing 2 players, say on like the Golden Girls edition, you can have evidence cards dealt to like a ghost player. But what you do in the 2023 edition is, instead of having a ghost player, evidence cards are placed at random in certain rooms. So players will want to travel to that room to reveal the evidence token. So it does a great job of adjusting the gameplay to match a roster of 6 players versus a roster of 2 players. So for the most playability, the 2023 can't be beat. The Golden Girls edition came close, and I will say the 49, you can certainly play with 2 players or you can play with 6 players, but you will notice a definite difference if you're playing 2-player. The games go a lot quicker. They feel a bit more tedious with a single die, whereas the different gameplay mechanics introduced in later iterations of Clue definitely helped quite a bit. So I got to say, the best value on the table, the best bang for the buck overall, I gotta give it to the 2023 Hasbro edition. They really knocked it out of the park with this one. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with everything but the thickness of the playing cards. If they could just get that, and this is still better than many playing cards that I got an Uno set recently that had thinner cards than this, and that's, the entire game is based on the cards. So to be fair, this is kind of a minor gripe, all things considered. The art's really nice. The print quality is nice. Refresh to the story lore is nice. I like that they had the art printed on the inside of the box, not just as like a base insert, but it actually is laid out like stuff scattered across a desk, kind of like you're looking at evidence. Really adds to the immersion. So the overall package, the overall art, 2023 Hasbro edition, wonderful. If you're looking for collector's editions, I'm sure there are so many other collector's edition games out there for different TV shows and movies. I gotta say, as somebody who grew up with Golden Girls being on TV all the time, I thought this was a nostalgic treat. So I gotta say, I really enjoyed the Golden Girls edition. It was actually the most expensive out of the 3. This one they charged a little bit more because it was a collector edition. Do I think that was worth it? Gameplay wise, if I was buying just for gameplay, buy the modern and call it a deal. But if you're buying because you like something, because you like the IP that it's based on, yeah, it was worth a few extra bucks for this. I can't tell you how much laughter was going on at the table playing this versus the other Clues. This definitely was good vibes all around. So this was a great value. The 49 Winning Moves edition was the one that I was the most disappointed by, but I want to temper that expectation in that it was also a very affordable game and it stuck to the classic simple rule set. And in that regard, it knocks it out of the park. If you don't want any extra frills, if you don't want to confuse somebody, if you have a seasoned game player who is so used to the original Clue that they don't want to hear about the extra stuff and they want everything to be what they remember, you can do a lot worse than going after this 1949 edition. I do think it's a very serviceable version of Clue with attractive game art, albeit it seems a bit sterile by comparison to the other editions that I have on the table. So as a bare bones Clue, functional, decent value. Not my favorite on the table, but I'm not going to say that I felt like for the price I got ripped off. It's just, this would be your base model Clue, in my opinion, whereas I really think that there's a lot of value to be had in the modern edition. So obviously there are many editions of Clue out there. which year was your favorite core entry, or maybe there's a collector's edition that I don't know about that you want to share. Why don't you comment below and let me know? Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.